Hello and welcome to X and Y Gaming Casually Competitive. My name is Arthur, aka Remedy G. Have you ever heard about Danny Sexbang? I'm basically as cool as him, but instead of busting hot jams all over your body, today I'll be making it rain Yu-Gi-Oh! Knowledge. Because today's video is a top 10 list. And before you try to tell me that no one likes top 10s, I invite you to Google search Watch Mojo. We're going to come out of the gate swinging with a pretty powerful one, and that's number 10. Life points don't matter. That's right. Sure, if your life point hits 0, then you lose. So of course they matter. To an extent. See, do you know what happens to a duelist when you only have one life point in a game? The same thing that happens to every other duelist. Nothing. And that's something you can really see with cards like Solemn Strike or Solemn Judgment. For something like Judgment, you'll never not be able to pay half, and with Strike, the ability to stop a monster's effect then destroy it for only 1500 life points is pretty amazing, considering you only go -1 for the trap card. And that's pretty important in a game where how many cards you have in your hand is just as important as how many cards you have on the field. Now, that goes into card economy, which is honestly something of its own video merits, but basically, it's the sum of cards you have on the field and in your hand, and any other statistic is generally irrelevant, including life points. Number 9. There's no refunds. Now, this one might honestly seem like a no-brainer, and not much of a tip or trick. However, I think it's important to remember that when you pay for a card's cost, you don't get it back if that card or its effect goes on to be negated. If you discard a card as part of a cost to activate a spell card, and that spell card is negated, not only do you not get to do the card's effect, you don't get back the card you discarded either. You simply lose 2 cards. The same thing if you pay life points and the effect is negated. Your life points don't just double out of pity for a negated Solemn Judgment. Hashtag sorry not sorry. Number 8. Cards sent to the graveyard rulings. Basically, if a card is sent to the graveyard, regardless of from where it's sent, it's done so face up. If you send or discard a monster from your hand or deck to the graveyard, then it's absolutely sent face up, despite the fact that it was in your hand or your deck, hidden from your opponent's view. If a monster card with the effect that includes, if it attacks a face-down defense position monster, send it directly to the graveyard without flipping it face up and without applying battle damage. Well, then the attacked face-down defense position monster would, in fact, still be sent to the graveyard face up. Basically, anything and everything in both players' graveyard is public knowledge to both players at any point in time. And for that matter, cards that go to the banished pile when an effect says to do so are, unless otherwise specified, sent there face up. Please note, if one or more cards are banished face down, then they are in fact not public knowledge, and then only the player who owns them can look at them. Number 7. Timing. If versus when. This one is pretty simple, but can easily be very frustrating on certain effects you may really want to use. For the best example I can think of, let's look no further than this good boy here, Dupe Frog. Dupe Frog's last line of text reads, when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add 1 frog monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand, except Dupe Frog. This is very important because it specifically is listed as when, which, in Yu-Gi-Oh terms, means the action of Dupe Frog being sent from the field to the graveyard needs to have been the last interaction that took place for you to be able to use the when optional effect of Dupe Frog. Let's say you have your Dupe Frog on the field and your opponent activates Dark Hole. So long as all the monsters being sent to the graveyard after being destroyed by Dark Hole was the last thing to happen, you'll be able to use Dupe Frog's effect. However, if you find your Dupe Frog getting destroyed in the middle of a chain, meaning there are still effects to resolve after Dupe Frog got destroyed, then you'll definitely miss the timing. Although, I'll get to chains later on. But next is Number 6. Destroy versus send versus discard. This one might be a little more obvious once you stop and think about it, but still. When you have some effect make you discard a card, that card is discarded and sent, but it wasn't destroyed. If a monster is destroyed by battle, it is sent to the graveyard, but it didn't come from the hand, so it couldn't have been discarded. If you are made to send one monster from your hand who just so happens to have a trigger effect that activates when it's discarded, said effect won't activate because it was sent to the graveyard, not discarded. Discarded equals sent. Sent does not equal discarded. Destroy equals sent. Sent does not equal destroy. Make sense? Number 5. Types of effects. A second ago, I just mentioned an effect by specifically referring to it as a trigger effect. But what is a trigger effect? Okay, there's ignition effects, trigger effects, and continuous effects. An ignition effect is an effect that activates because you, the player, activated it. A trigger effect is an effect that activates because a condition was met. And a continuous effect is an effect that is perpetually in effect after activation for as long as the card with the effect is face up on the field, unless it gets negated. An ignition effect is something you have to actively do yourself, most specifically during one of your main phases. A prime example being Trigate Wizard's 2 co-link effect that allows you to banish a target card on the field once per turn. It isn't specifically marked as a quick effect, so it can only be activated during your own main phase. A trigger effect would be like Glow Up Bloom's effect, specifically the one that adds or special summons a high-level zombie from your deck when Glow Up Bloom is sent to the graveyard. Glow Up Bloom being sent to the graveyard was the trigger. Meanwhile, a continuous effect always being around would be like a field spell giving dragon monsters a 500 attack boost. It's just doing it at all times. Also note, the only types of effects that can be used during the damage step of a battle phase are the effects that specifically affect either the attack or defense of one or more monsters on the field. So just keep that in mind. Number 4. Speed Spell. During both yours and your opponent's turn, you can activate cards and effects. If it's your turn, you can activate and use pretty much any card or effect, and during your opponent's turn, you can activate and use only spell speed 2 or 3 cards and effects. But how can you tell what kinds of cards are what kinds of effects? Well, just look at the card. Basically, any type of spell card except click play spells are spell speed 1, meaning they have to be activated only during your main phases on your turn. Also, monster effects that aren't continuous or that aren't specifically labeled on the card as a quick effect or prefaced with during either player's turn are all spell speed 1 as well. Spell speed 2 covers almost all types of trap cards, those monster effects that can be activated by the player as a quick effect, and, of course, quick play spells. Spell speed 3, the fastest, consists of only countered trap cards. Once a countered trap card has been activated in a chain, the only thing a player can do in response to that is another countered trap card. As a side note, before moving on to number 3, I just want to point out that the community has coined the term spell speed 4, for something like super polymerization, right? Super polymerization is a spell speed 2, as it's a quick play spell, but it also dictates that neither player can activate any card or effect in response to the activation of super polymerization, meaning it can't be chained to. Again, members of the community have coined it as a spell speed 4, but I really want to stress that spell speed 4 isn't actually a thing in Yu-Gi-Oh! And cards like super polymerization simply cannot be chained to because of their own card's text. Super polymerization is still very much so a spell speed 2. Oh, okay. Number 3, and number 2, Chains and Reverse Resolution. Alright, when I wrote this list out at first, at the beginning of the year, I didn't take into account how hand in hand these things go. I just more so thought, oh yeah, that's a pretty important thing to know. Anyway, now that I've covered spell speed, thus when you can and can't use a card or effect, I'll talk about something that often comes up in gameplay, and that's chains. If you summon a Celtic Guardian and your opponent reveals their face down card and activates Trap Hole, well, that's not really a chain, because there's only one reactionary thing happening, and that's Trap Hole. Now, if you were to reveal your own face down and activate Trap Stun, Now that's a secondary reactionary thing happening, so a chain occurs. And they can get pretty lengthy. In fact, there used to be a slew of cards that you could only activate as a certain chain link or higher in order to get its effects. It was pretty crazy stuff. But let's take our example here and see what all we can build on it. You summon Celtic Guardian. Your opponent activates Trap Hole. You chain Trap Stun, and your opponent chains Solemn Judgment. But you chain your own Solemn Judgment! You have nothing else to chain with, and your opponent doesn't either, so now you resolve in reverse order. From the top, Solemn Judgment negates the first Solemn Judgment beneath it and is done. That first Solemn Judgment is negated and is done. Trap Stun is unhindered and negates the Trap Hole beneath it and is done. Trap Hole is negated and done. Celtic Guardian lives to die another phase. Number 1. Inherent Summoning, and why it totally matters. There's a pretty core concept of Yu-Gi-Oh! That doesn't ever really seem to be explained, but problem-solving card text alludes to the fact that there's a distinction between these two types of summons. The problem-solving card text illusion happens with something like Solemn Warning, when one or more monsters would be summoned, or, and the or there is very important because it's capitalized both letters to really stand out, or when a spell or trap card or monster effect is activated that includes an effect that special summons one or more monsters, pay 2,000 life points, negate the summon or activation, and if you do, destroy it. And there you have it. The trap card itself, as simple as its lines of text are, actually take the time to differentiate and draw attention to the differentiation between a special summoning that just is happening versus a special summoning that's happening because of something else. An inherent special summon just is happening. A synchro summon, an Xyz summon, a link summon, even a pendulum summon actually. Non-inherent special summons are the ones that happen because of something else, like a ritual or a fusion summon. The fact that Solemn Warning has to differentiate between the two of them to ensure that it in fact does cover both of them can let us infer that there are two types of special summons. And of course it matters, because at least now you know you can't, say, Solemn Strike a ritual or a fusion summon monster on summon. So, I don't know, I guess just bottomless it. And there you go. That's all I've got for this top 10 list. Was it as good for you as it was for me? If so, I invite you to tell me exactly what it is you liked or didn't like down in the comments. Maybe consider subscribing for more. I thank you so very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. And hey, hug your mama.